Hey everyone, welcome to my channel from start to now. If you love uncovering hidden stories from history, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our future videos. Let's dive in. What if everything you learned about Peru was a lie? Long before Europe knew this land, ancient civilizations here built empires, mastered the mountains, and created knowledge so advanced it still shocks historians today. And most Americans were never taught their story. Peru's real history did not begin with the Incas, and it certainly did not begin when Europeans arrived. Long before famous stone cities like Machu Picchu were built, and long before Spanish conquistadors stepped onto South American soil, human civilization in Peru was already thousands of years deep, evolving quietly and powerfully in ways most people never learn about. When history is told in short summaries, it often skips straight to the Inca Empire as if everything before it was empty or undeveloped. But that idea could not be further from the truth. Peru was one of the earliest centers of human civilization on Earth, and its story stretches back to a time when much of the world was still experimenting with basic survival. Around 5,000 years ago, when ancient Egypt was raising pyramids and Mesopotamia was forming city-states, people along Peru's coast were already building organized urban centers. One of the most remarkable examples is the Caral civilization, located in the Soup Valley. This society existed around 3000 BCE, making it one of the oldest known civilizations in the world. Caral was not a simple village or a temporary settlement. It was a planned city with massive stone platforms, sunken plazas, residential areas, and ceremonial spaces. The people of Caral practiced agriculture, managed water resources, and maintained trade networks that reached the mountains and the sea. What makes this even more surprising is that they achieved all of this without pottery, without metal tools, and without written language. Caral challenges the traditional idea of how civilizations are supposed to form. There is little evidence of warfare or weapons, suggesting that this society may have been built on cooperation, religion, and trade rather than conquest. Music instruments like flutes made from bird bones have been discovered there, hinting at a culture rich in ritual and expression. These people were not simply surviving. They were organizing, creating, and thinking on a large scale. Yet for most of modern history, Caral was ignored or misunderstood, partly because it did not fit the familiar narrative shaped around Europe and the Middle East. As centuries passed, Peru did not move backward or disappear into silence. Instead, new cultures rose, learned from the past, and added their own ideas. The Chavín civilization, which emerged around 900 BC, marked a major turning point in Andean history. Chavín was not just a local culture. It became a powerful religious and cultural influence that connected distant regions of Peru. At the heart of this civilization was Chavín de Huanta, a ceremonial center built high in the mountains. People traveled long distances to reach it, bringing offerings and beliefs from their home regions. Through religion, art, and shared symbolism, Chavín helped unite diverse groups of people who spoke different languages and lived in very different environments. The art of Chavín reveals a sophisticated understanding of psychology and belief. Stone carvings show figures that shift between human and animal forms, often combining features of jaguars, snakes, and birds. These images were likely designed to inspire awe, fear, and spiritual transformation. The architecture itself played a role in this experience, with dark passageways, underground galleries, and controlled water channels that produced roaring sounds during rituals. This was not accidental design. It was carefully planned to shape how people felt and what they believed. Long before modern ideas of mass influence, these ancient Peruvians understood how to use space, sound, and imagery to create power. Following Chavín, cultures like the Moche flourished along the northern coast of Peru. The Moche were extraordinary engineers and artists who mastered irrigation in one of the driest deserts on Earth. They diverted rivers, built canals, and turned barren land into fertile fields. Their cities were dominated by massive adobe pyramids, some of the largest structures in the ancient Americas. Unlike many other early cultures, the Moche left behind detailed visual records of their lives through pottery. These ceramics show scenes of farming, fishing, warfare, ceremonies, and even medical procedures, giving us an unusually clear window into their world. The Moche understood human anatomy well enough to perform complex surgeries, and they developed social systems with clear leadership, religious authority, and skilled labor. Their society was not simple or isolated. It was complex, organized, and deeply connected to its environment. They studied the movement of the moon, the cycles of rain, and the behavior of the sea, adapting their lives to forces they could not control but clearly understood. Once again, this level of knowledge existed long before the Incas, quietly shaping the foundations of Andean civilization. Further south, the Nazca civilization left behind one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. The Nazca Lines, enormous figures carved into the desert floor, can only be fully seen from the air. These designs include animals, plants, and precise geometric patterns stretching for kilometers. Creating them required careful planning, mathematical understanding, and cooperation across generations. The Nazca also developed underground water systems known as puquios, which allowed them to survive in an extremely dry environment. These systems are still used today, a powerful reminder that ancient knowledge can outlast modern technology. All of these civilizations existed independently, yet they were connected through trade, shared ideas, and gradual cultural exchange. Over time, knowledge accumulated rather than disappearing. Farming techniques improved, architecture became more refined, and social organization grew more complex. By the time the Inca Empire emerged in the 15th century, it inherited thousands of years of experimentation, success, and failure. The Incas did not build their empire from nothing. They stood on the shoulders of countless generations who had already solved many of the challenges of living in the Andes. Understanding this changes everything about how we see Peru's past. It reveals that the region was not waiting to be discovered or developed. It was already home to some of the most innovative societies in human history, societies that learned to thrive in mountains, deserts, and jungles through intelligence, adaptability, and deep respect for nature. The real beginning of Peru's history is not a single empire or a famous ruin. It is a long, continuous human story that began thousands of years ago and never truly stopped. Civilizations like Caral, Chavín, Moche, Nazca, and Wari were not isolated or primitive societies existing on the margins of human progress. They were advanced cultures that actively shaped the scientific, religious, and political foundations of ancient Peru long before the rise of the Inca Empire. Each of these civilizations contributed layers of knowledge that accumulated over centuries, creating a deep reservoir of experience that later societies would draw upon. Yet, despite their importance, their achievements were largely erased or minimized in Western education, leaving behind a simplified story that overlooks how sophisticated the ancient Andes truly were. Caral stands at the beginning of this long process, demonstrating that complex civilization in Peru emerged independently and remarkably early. What is most striking about Caral is not just its age, but the level of organization it achieved without the tools that are often considered essential for progress. There is no evidence of metalworking, ceramics, or written language, yet the people of Caral designed monumental architecture with precise symmetry and urban planning. They understood astronomy well enough to align structures with celestial events, suggesting early scientific observation of the skies. Agriculture in Caral relied on intelligent use of river systems, and trade networks connected coastal fishing communities with inland farmers, creating economic balance through cooperation rather than domination. Chavín expanded this legacy by transforming religion into a unifying force that crossed regional boundaries. The ceremonial center of Chavín de Huanta was not simply a place of worship. It functioned as an ideological hub where beliefs, artistic styles, and technological ideas spread across much of Peru. The religious imagery of Chavín reveals a deep understanding of human perception. The blending of human and animal forms was likely meant to represent transformation, power, and the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. The architecture amplified this experience, using narrow corridors, darkness, and echoing water to overwhelm the senses. This suggests a deliberate use of psychology and environmental science to shape belief, something that would later be echoed in imperial religions around the world. The Moche civilization brought a new level of technological and scientific sophistication, particularly in engineering and medicine. Living in a harsh desert environment, the Moche mastered irrigation systems that redirected rivers over long distances, allowing them to support large populations. Their agricultural knowledge included crop rotation and soil management, showing an early understanding of environmental sustainability. Moche metallurgy produced finely crafted gold, silver, and copper objects, indicating advanced chemical knowledge and artistic skill. Their medical practices, especially cranial surgery, reveal a practical understanding of the human body that rivaled or exceeded that of many contemporary societies elsewhere in the world. Perhaps the most valuable contribution of the Moche lies in their visual storytelling. Through detailed ceramics and murals, they recorded events, rituals, and social roles with remarkable clarity. These images show organized armies, complex religious ceremonies, and structured leadership, proving that the Moche operated within a highly developed political system. This visual record serves as a form of historical documentation, challenging the idea that written language is the only way to preserve knowledge. Even without texts, the Moche communicated history, law, and belief through art that still speaks across centuries. The Nazca civilization added another layer of intellectual depth through their relationship with landscape and astronomy. The Nazca Lines required advanced planning, mathematical precision, and long-term communal effort. Creating figures on such a massive scale suggests an ability to conceptualize space in ways that went far beyond everyday survival. The fact that these designs have lasted for centuries shows a deep understanding of environmental conditions, including wind patterns and soil composition. Nazca engineering extended underground as well, with water systems that tapped into aquifers and ensured survival during long droughts. These puquios represent an early mastery of hydrology and geological observation. The purpose of the Nazca Lines remains debated, but what is undeniable is the intellectual ambition behind them. Whether used for ritual, astronomy, or social organization, they reflect a culture willing to invest enormous energy into symbolic and scientific projects. This willingness to think beyond immediate needs is one of the clearest signs of an advanced civilization, yet it is often reduced to mystery or speculation rather than recognized as evidence of complex thought. The Wari civilization played perhaps the most direct role in shaping what would later become the Inca Empire. The Wari developed one of the first true imperial systems in the Andes, complete with planned cities, administrative centers, road networks, and standardized architectural styles. Their urban planning shows careful attention to logistics, defense, and governance. Storage facilities allowed them to manage food supplies across regions, reducing the impact of famine and natural disasters. This level of administrative control required not only engineering skill, but also mathematical planning and bureaucratic organization. Wari influence spread across vast distances, integrating diverse populations under a shared political and cultural framework. They established systems of governance that balanced central authority with local control, a model that the Incas would later refine and expand. Many of the roads and settlements attributed to the Incas were built on earlier Wari foundations, demonstrating how knowledge was inherited rather than invented from scratch. This continuity reveals a long tradition of statecraft and political science in ancient Peru. Despite all of this, Western narratives have often treated these civilizations as footnotes rather than foundations. The focus on the Inca Empire as a sudden achievement ignores the centuries of innovation that made such an empire possible. This selective storytelling is not accidental. It reflects a broader tendency to center history around Europe and its descendants while minimizing independent developments elsewhere. By doing so, it creates the illusion that progress follows a single path and that advanced knowledge must originate from a few recognized centers. Recognizing the contributions of Caral, Chavín, Moche, Nazca, and Wari forces us to reconsider that assumption. These civilizations developed science, religion, engineering, and political systems suited to their environments and needs, often achieving solutions that modern societies still admire. Their knowledge was empirical, experimental, and deeply connected to nature, emphasizing balance rather than domination. That worldview, once dismissed as primitive, now appears increasingly relevant in a world facing environmental and social challenges. The erasure of these civilizations from mainstream education is not just a loss of historical detail, it is a loss of perspective. It hides the reality that human ingenuity is widespread and that complex societies have emerged in many forms across the globe. Peru's ancient cultures were not waiting to be taught or civilized. They were already innovating, governing, and imagining the world in sophisticated ways. Their legacy lives on in the landscapes they shaped, the traditions that survived conquest, and the silent knowledge embedded in stone, soil, and memory. The Inca Empire stands as one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history, not because it followed the familiar patterns seen in Europe or Asia, but because it succeeded by doing almost everything differently. In just a few generations, the Incas built the largest empire in the Americas, stretching across mountains, deserts, valleys, and jungles, connecting millions of people under a single system of governance. What makes this even more remarkable is that they accomplished it without many of the technologies that are usually considered essential for building an advanced civilization. There was no written language, no iron or steel tools, no wheeled vehicles, and no formal currency, yet the empire functioned with an efficiency that continues to puzzle historians and impress engineers. At the heart of the Inca system was an extraordinary ability to organize information and labor. Without books or written records, the Incas relied on quipu, a complex system of knotted cords used to record numerical data and possibly narrative information. Each knot, color, and position carried meaning, allowing trained officials to store and retrieve information about population, harvests, labor obligations, and resources. This was not a simple counting tool. It was a highly structured data system that allowed the state to manage vast territories. Knowledge was preserved through memory, repetition, and oral tradition, passed down by specialists whose role was to remember and interpret information with precision. The Inca road network was another masterpiece of engineering and organization. Over 40,000 kilometers of roads connected the empire, crossing some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. These roads were not just paths, They were carefully constructed with drainage systems, retaining walls, staircases carved into mountainsides, and suspension bridges made from woven grass. Along these routes were way stations known as tambos, where travelers and messengers could rest, eat, and find shelter. A relay system of runners, called chasquis, carried messages across the empire at remarkable speed, allowing information to travel hundreds of kilometers in just a few days. This communication network gave the Incas a level of control and responsiveness that rivaled many later empires. Orders from the capital could reach distant provinces quickly, and news from the edges of the empire could return just as fast. This made it possible to respond to rebellions, natural disasters, or shortages with coordinated action. The empire functioned less like a loose collection of territories and more like a single, integrated organism, with each part connected to the whole. Agriculture formed the backbone of Inca society, and here again their innovation was striking. Farming in the Andes meant dealing with steep slopes, thin air, and unpredictable weather, yet the Incas turned these challenges into advantages. They built agricultural terraces that reduced erosion, conserved water, and created microclimates suited to different crops. These terraces allowed them to grow maize, potatoes, quinoa, and hundreds of other plants at varying altitudes. The Incas also developed sophisticated storage systems, constructing massive storehouses that preserved food for years using natural ventilation and cold mountain air. This agricultural surplus supported not only the population but also the state itself. Instead of taxes paid in money, the Incas operated on a labor system known as mita. Citizens contributed a portion of their time to state projects, such as building roads, farming state lands, or serving in the army. In return, the state provided food during hard times, organized large public works, and ensured basic welfare. This system created a strong sense of collective responsibility and reduced the risk of starvation, even in years of poor harvests. Medicine and science in the Inca Empire reveal an advanced understanding of the human body and the natural world. Inca surgeons performed complex procedures, including trepanation, a form of skull surgery used to treat head injuries. Archaeological evidence shows that many patients survived these operations, suggesting not only technical skill but also knowledge of infection control and healing. Herbal medicine played a major role in Inca healthcare, with a deep understanding of plant properties passed down through generations. Inca architecture remains one of the most visible symbols of their genius. Stone structures were built with such precision that massive blocks fit together without mortar, yet could withstand earthquakes that destroyed later colonial buildings. This technique required not only skill, but an intimate understanding of stone, pressure, and movement. Sites like Cusco and Machu Picchu were not just functional cities. They were carefully designed to align with the landscape, incorporating mountains, rivers, and celestial events into their layout. The natural world was not something to be conquered, but something to be integrated into daily life. Religion and governance were deeply intertwined in the Inca world. The emperor, known as the Sapa Inca, was believed to be the descendant of the sun god Intai, giving political authority a sacred foundation. This belief helped unify diverse populations under a shared cosmology. Religious festivals, rituals, and monuments reinforced loyalty to the state while also providing a sense of meaning and order. Temples were often aligned with astronomical events, reflecting careful observation of the sun, moon, and stars. This knowledge guided agricultural cycles and reinforced the connection between cosmic order and earthly rule. What is often overlooked is how adaptable the Inca system was. When the empire expanded, conquered peoples were not simply destroyed or erased. Local leaders were often integrated into the imperial system, traditions were respected, and skills were redistributed across regions. Craftspeople, farmers, and specialists were relocated to areas where their knowledge was most needed, spreading innovation throughout the empire. This policy reduced resistance and increased efficiency, showing a sophisticated understanding of social management. All of this was achieved in a remarkably short period. In less than a century, the Incas transformed from a small highland kingdom into a continental power. Such rapid expansion was only possible because they inherited and refined knowledge from earlier civilizations like the Wari and Tiwanaku. The Inca Empire was not an accident of history. It was the result of centuries of accumulated wisdom, carefully organized and applied on an unprecedented scale. The absence of writing, wheels, and iron did not limit the Incas. It forced them to develop alternative solutions that were equally effective and in some cases superior. Their success challenges the idea that there is only one path to civilization and progress. The Inca Empire proves that human intelligence can take many forms, shaped by environment, culture, and values. It stands as a reminder that advanced societies existed long before modern technology, and that their achievements deserve to be understood not as curiosities, but as evidence of a different and deeply impressive way of organizing the world. The arrival of the Spanish in Peru did not simply mark the fall of the Inca Empire. It began a long process of cultural destruction, historical manipulation, and human suffering that reshaped the region in ways that are still felt today. When Francisco Pizarro and his small group of conquistadors entered Inca territory in the early 16th century, they encountered a vast, organized empire weakened not by inferiority but by circumstance. Disease, brought unintentionally by earlier European contact, had already spread through the Andes, killing large portions of the population and even claiming the life of the Emperor Huayna Capac. This triggered a brutal civil war between his sons, Atahualpa and Huascar, leaving the empire divided and vulnerable at the exact moment the Spanish arrived. Rather than meeting the Incas in open battle, the Spanish relied on deception, alliances, and psychological warfare. Atahualpa, confident in his power and unfamiliar with European tactics, agreed to meet Pizarro peacefully. He was captured in a surprise attack, despite being surrounded by thousands of his own soldiers. This single act shattered the political and spiritual heart of the empire. The Inca ruler was not just a king, he was believed to be divinely connected to the sun god. His capture sent shockwaves across the Andes, creating confusion and fear that the Spanish quickly exploited. The ransom demanded for Atahualpa revealed the unimaginable wealth of the Inca world. A room was filled from floor to ceiling with gold and silver collected from across the empire. Temples were stripped, sacred objects were destroyed, and centuries of artistry were melted down into bars for transport to Europe. Even after receiving this vast ransom, the Spanish executed Atahualpa, proving that their goal was not negotiation or coexistence, but total domination. This betrayal marked the symbolic end of the Inca state and the beginning of a new colonial order built on violence and extraction. Spanish conquest did not stop with political control. It targeted culture, belief, and memory. Indigenous religions were labeled as pagan and demonic, and temples were torn down or converted into churches. Sacred sites were deliberately built over, both physically and symbolically replacing one world, you with another. Indigenous languages were suppressed in favor of Spanish, and oral traditions that carried history and identity were discouraged or punished. What could not be destroyed outright was often reinterpreted through a European lens, stripping it of its original meaning. One of the most devastating aspects of colonial rule was the labor system imposed on indigenous communities. The Spanish adapted and intensified existing labor practices into systems like the encomienda and later the mita, forcing native populations to work in mines, plantations, and construction projects under brutal conditions. Silver mines such as Potosi became engines of global wealth for Spain, fueling European economies while consuming indigenous lives at an astonishing rate. Millions died from overwork, malnutrition, and disease, a demographic collapse so severe that entire regions were left nearly empty. This suffering was not an accidental byproduct of empire. It was a central feature of colonial exploitation. Indigenous people were viewed as resources rather than human beings, and their lives were considered expendable in the pursuit of wealth. African slaves were later brought in to replace the shrinking native workforce, adding another layer of suffering and injustice to colonial Peru. The wealth extracted from the Andes helped finance European wars, palaces, and industries, while the people who produced it were left impoverished and forgotten. As colonial society took shape, history itself became a tool of control. Spanish chroniclers wrote accounts of the Inca past that emphasized savagery, superstition, and tyranny, portraying conquest as a civilizing mission rather than an act of aggression. Indigenous voices were largely excluded from these records, and when they did appear, they were often filtered through translators or reshaped to fit European expectations. This version of history, written by the victors, became the foundation for how Peru was understood in the West. Even after independence from Spain in the 19th century, these colonial narratives did not disappear. Power shifted from Spanish rulers to local elites, but indigenous communities remained marginalized. Land ownership, political influence, and education were concentrated in the hands of a small segment of society, while the descendants of the ancient civilizations continued to face discrimination and poverty. The deep wounds left by conquest were never fully addressed, only covered over by new political structures that preserved old inequalities. Resistance, however, never truly died. Indigenous uprisings occurred throughout the colonial period, the most famous led by Tupac Amaru Roman II in the late 18th century. His rebellion challenged Spanish authority and demanded an end to forced labor and abuse. Although it was ultimately crushed and met with extreme brutality, it revealed that the spirit of resistance was still alive. His execution was meant to terrify the population into submission, but instead his name became a lasting symbol of defiance and justice. What is often missing from American narratives is the scale and intentionality of this cultural erasure. The story is frequently simplified into a tale of exploration and empire building, minimizing the human cost and moral consequences. By focusing on European achievements and expansion, textbooks often ignore the destruction of knowledge systems, social structures, and ways of life that had developed over thousands of years. This selective memory allows colonial violence to be normalized or excused, rather than understood as a tragedy with lasting consequences. The loss was not only measured in lives but in knowledge. Agricultural techniques, medical practices, spiritual philosophies, and environmental understanding were disrupted or lost as communities were destroyed or forced to abandon their traditions. Entire libraries of oral history vanished as elders died and languages declined. What survived did so quietly, hidden within festivals, folklore, and daily practices that blended indigenous and European elements as a means of survival. Understanding this part of Peru's history requires moving beyond the idea of conquest as an inevitable or necessary step in progress. It demands recognition of the suffering inflicted and the deliberate rewriting of the past that followed. The Spanish conquest did not simply end the Inca Empire. It attempted to erase the memory of everything that came before and to replace it with a story that justified domination. That rewritten history shaped how Peru was seen by the world and how Peruvians were taught to see themselves for generations, leaving a legacy that continues to influence identity, inequality, and historical understanding today despite centuries of conquest, suppression, and cultural rewriting. Peru's ancient legacy never truly vanished because it was carried forward by people rather than monuments alone. While empires can fall and cities can be destroyed, memory has a way of surviving in language, customs, farming practices, and quiet traditions passed from one generation to the next. Beneath the surface of modern Peru, the knowledge and world view of ancient civilizations continue to exist, often unnoticed by outsiders but deeply present in everyday life. This survival challenges the idea that history moves in clean breaks and instead reveals a continuous thread connecting the distant past to the present. One of the clearest signs of this living legacy is language. Quechua, the language of the Inca Empire, is still spoken by millions of people across Peru and neighboring countries. It is not a ceremonial relic or a forgotten tongue preserved only in textbooks. It is a living language used in homes, markets, and rural communities. Through Quechua, ancient ways of thinking about time, nature, and relationships continue to shape how people understand the world. Words tied to agriculture, seasons, and geography reflect a deep connection to the land, preserving knowledge that predates European arrival by centuries. Traditional farming practices offer another powerful example of continuity. High in the Andes, farmers still use agricultural terraces first developed by ancient civilizations. These terraces prevent erosion, conserve water, and create microclimates that allow crops to thrive at extreme altitudes. Potatoes, one of the world's most important food crops, were domesticated in this region thousands of years ago, and Peru remains home to thousands of varieties. The techniques used to grow, store, and preserve these crops were perfected long before modern science explained why they worked, yet they continue to feed communities today. Festivals and rituals also carry echoes of the ancient world. Many celebrations that appear Catholic on the surface are layered with indigenous symbolism beneath. Ancient deities associated with the sun, earth, and mountains were not erased but transformed, hidden within new religious forms as a way to survive colonial pressure. The reverence for Pachamama, the Earth Mother, remains strong, especially in rural areas where offerings are still made to ensure good harvests and protection. These practices reveal a world centered on balance, respect for nature, and reciprocity rather than domination. Architecture tells a similar story of survival. In cities like Cusco, Inca stonework forms the foundation of colonial buildings, its precision so perfect that it has withstood earthquakes that destroyed later structures. This physical layering mirrors the cultural layering of Peru itself, where ancient knowledge supports modern life, even when it is not openly acknowledged. Roads, walls, and irrigation systems built centuries ago are still in use, quietly serving communities without recognition of their origins. The survival of this legacy also lies in identity. For many Peruvians, especially indigenous communities, the past is not something distant or abstract. It is part of who they are. Clothing patterns, weaving techniques, music, and storytelling traditions preserve symbols and meanings passed down over generations. These expressions are not museums of the past, but living forms of cultural resistance, asserting continuity in the face of historical attempts to erase them. This persistence directly challenges the Western idea that progress only flows from Europe or modern industrial societies. Ancient Peruvian civilizations developed solutions suited to their environment, emphasizing sustainability, community, and long-term balance. In a world now facing environmental crisis and social fragmentation, these ancient perspectives appear less primitive and more visionary. The idea that humans are caretakers of the land rather than owners stands in contrast to extractive models that have caused widespread harm. The reason this legacy was long ignored or dismissed has much to do with how history has been taught. Western narratives often frame indigenous cultures as vanished or defeated, existing only in the past. This framing makes it easier to overlook their continued presence and influence. By presenting ancient Peru as a closed chapter, education systems avoid confronting the resilience of indigenous knowledge and the injustices that attempted to suppress it. Yet in recent decades, there has been a growing effort within Peru to reclaim and celebrate this heritage. Archaeological discoveries, indigenous activism, and cultural revival movements are bringing ancient histories back into public consciousness. Younger generations are learning traditional languages, crafts, and histories that were once discouraged or forgotten. This revival is not about rejecting modernity, but about integrating the past into a more complete understanding of identity. The ancient legacy of Peru also survives in the land itself. Mountains, rivers, and valleys are still regarded as living entities by many communities, deserving respect and care. This relationship with nature shaped ancient engineering, agriculture, and religion, and it continues to influence environmental attitudes today. While modern development often clashes with these values, the underlying philosophy has not disappeared. Recognizing this continuity changes how history is understood. It reveals that conquest did not fully succeed in its goal of erasure, and that ancient civilizations did not simply vanish into ruins. Their knowledge adapted, hid, and endured, carried by people who refused to let it disappear. This survival is itself a form of resistance, a quiet but powerful statement that identity cannot be completely destroyed by force. Peru's living legacy reminds us that history is not only written in books or carved into stone. It exists in voices, practices, and relationships that continue long after empires fall. By acknowledging this, the story of Peru becomes not one of loss alone, but of resilience and continuity, challenging the idea that the modern world replaced the ancient one, and instead showing that the ancient world is still here, shaping lives, landscapes, and ways of thinking in subtle but enduring ways.